Greetings, and thank each and every one of you for joining us on another edition of the most powerful platform for truth, bar none, anywhere on YouTube and across the web. I am Rashid, and this is your platform for education and empowerment. This is the Red Pill Diaries, and I'd like to first, before I bring in our esteemed guest, I would like to thank Matthew Eric for a lot of things that he's done behind the scenes, and we'll talk about them on another occasion. And I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining us and who will join us in the chat and just listening and viewing this, because we know how YouTube takes this show out of the algorithm and we know how they suppress the numbers. But before we get into all that, we got to bring in our esteemed guest, and I am so thankful that he took me up on my offer, Mr. Lawrence, Dr. Lawrence Freeman. How's it going today, Mr. Freeman?
Very good, thank you. And yourself?
Oh, I'm blessed. I'm breathing, so I'm blessed, and I can't complain too much. I want to start the show off by addressing something that came out yesterday and came out to this morning. Um, the United States, they're trying to sneak more money into the funding for the Ukraine war. And we were told that the supplemental bill that was passed did not contain any funding for Ukraine. And then later on in that day, which was yesterday, Biden said that he had talked to McCarthy, the Speaker of the House, and they had agreed to fund Ukraine. And now this morning, we see Lindsey Graham. I saw a clip of Lindsey Graham saying that they're going to give Ukraine $60 billion. Now, the reason I wanted to bring this up first, we know that this war is bleeding the Ukrainian nation. We know that it is breaking the back of American empire and the European Union. But one thing gets ignored in all of this is, again, I have to keep bringing this up on every show because it is marginalized by most shows and most pundits, is that there was a budget government analysis of what it would take to eradicate homelessness across the board in America, and it costs $20 billion. And this same government study said that it would take another 20 to 30 billion to completely eradicate poverty across the United States. Now, why is it that Lindsey Graham, Joe Biden, McCarthy, and the rest of the government officials seem to think that America's national security lies 10,000 miles across the seas, and they neglect home when this is of the most critical um, um, needs the most critical addressing, especially as people are suffering. They have to choose between health care. They have to choose between whether to eat or pay their mortgage, or whether to buy medicine or to pay their car note. Are these people lunatics? And why is this happening?
Well, there's a lot packed in there, what you asked. The Biden administration, prior to the continuing resolution to keep the government open, had requested $24 billion. I have no idea where Lindsey Graham came up with the figure of 60 billion. But the point is, one is that this war was totally unnecessary. It didn't have to happen. It shouldn't have happened. It could have been avoided. There were legitimate security concerns that the Russians have had increasingly since 2014 coup that took place in February 2014. And those security concerns, which are legitimate, were never addressed. There's a faction, I call it the geopolitical faction in the West, which has this perverted, diseased idea of a zero-sum game of the world. And they wanted to use the Ukraine situation to destroy or so weaken Russia that they would have to submit to all of the dictates of the new rules-based international order. Now, you raise a very interesting question on the money. As you might know, and Matt knows, I'm an expert in African affairs, which is a rarity in the United States. And I was discussing the same point with somebody else because I've been working with some Africans on establishing an Africa Infrastructure Development Bank, which would be totally dedicated to infrastructure, which is the most serious need of Africa. It's killing people every day. The lack of electricity, lack of railroads, electricity, railroads, infrastructure. And we were discussing how we would capitalize the bank. And I said, well, we have to get the United States to do it. The United States will never do it because they'll say we don't have the money. Now, one thing that was pointed out in this year and a half long war between Ukraine and Russia is any time the United States wants to, it has the money. It's actually a good feature of our Constitution that the founding fathers put in that the government can create debt. That's a good thing. And the problem is only the refusal to issue money to deal with the homeless question and the poverty question in the United States. With $100 billion, we can make a major dent in providing electricity to Africa, which is starving from electricity, really. These things could be done, but everybody says, no, the money's not there. Where's the money going to come from? Well, this shows you that when there's a decision made to spend the money can be created. It's now part of our debt. Whether you like the war or don't like the war, the government has now given Ukraine over 100 billion, and I don't think it's going to stop in the near future. And I think the U.S. will continue to push that kind of money in, even though there is resistance building. Not some resistance in the Republican Party. There's resistance in other countries, and there's various reports of how successful or unsuccessful the Ukrainians are. But now the issue is on the table. Is the United States committed to development of the United States and to the development of the rest of the world, which we used to be committed to? And under this Biden administration and the Republicans too, because they don't have any programs for development, the United States has lost its commitment to development. And this is very clear to me. And this is something that I fight against and basically get myself in trouble because I have a different view of the United States on these policies.
You know, there's an old saying that he who defends everything defends nothing and leaves themselves exposed at home. Why is everybody everyone else's business um, in Asia, Africa, Latin America, Europe? Why is that America's business and her first priority when everything is falling apart at home?
Well, there's no question, and this is something that the leading political figures in the United States don't want to face, is how bad things are in the United States. They don't want to admit this. They come up with these statistics, which are averages. But if you talk to everyday people, like I do when I'm here in the United States or when I'm in Africa, they're suffering. They're not doing well. They're being young people being forced to live with their parents because they can't afford a mortgage. People, as we know, are living paycheck to paycheck. Poverty is actually on the rise, and we're not building for a future. We're not building infrastructure in the United States, and therefore there is a real failure of the political elites, the financial political elites, the oligarchy, to address, to desire to address the needs of the American people. On the foreign policy, we could play a positive role if we wanted to. For example, I have proposed now for many years that China and the United States could combine their efforts in a joint mission to eliminate poverty in Africa. Africa now is the largest amount of people living in a poverty and extreme poverty of any group of countries in the world, almost 500 million people. China eliminated poverty for 750 million people. Even though the United States economy is in very poor shape, we as a nation have the capability to respond and expand our economy and work with other nations to actually improve the lives of other people in addition to Americans. My view is that John F. Kennedy was the last president who had a vision for development and a vision for peace in the world. Since then, every president we've had has been trapped in this geopolitical doctrine, and that's probably why President Kennedy was killed. And they don't really consider the needs of America, of Americans, and they don't consider the needs of the rest of the planet. There's no dichotomy between developing the rest of the world and developing the United States. In fact, they go together. If we were to raise the standard of living of Africans, which is 1.5 billion now, and in 30 years is going to be 2.5 billion, this will be the largest market in the world. So if we raise the standard of living and we build industry and we build manufacturing and agricultural processing, then those countries will want and need to buy American products. And this is the same with any country in the world. So developing the world economy expands the US economy, will create jobs, will create opportunities. There is no dichotomy. Yet in the minds of this oligarchical elite, they don't really care about either. They don't care about American people, and they don't care about the rest of the world. And that's the case with both parties. So we're in a very, very difficult crisis point right now in the United States and globally.
One more question on the American home front before we pivot to your expertise over on the African continent. Why do you think that more government officials and more scholars and more think tanks don't focus on the funding of education and the funding of the quality of education, because it is education that civilizes us, and it is education that keeps a nation prosperous and also helps it to progress into the future. They have defunded the educational system, and now we see that the inner cities have been turned into war zones. So that in itself is America taking a gun and putting bullets in the chamber and putting it to his head because it's killing his own future.
You really, I must applaud you. You put your finger on really one of the most crucial elements that defines the deficiency in U.S. policy right now. And it also tells you how little the leadership of the United States, Republican and Democrat, care about the future of the United States. You would almost have to, one might almost say it's a conspiracy to destroy the United States. Because you're absolutely right. Without educating our children, we have no future. I follow this very carefully because members of my family are educators, teachers. And the latest statistics that came out is only 33% of fourth graders are reading at a basic level, not a advanced level. Now, what does that mean? The way it works in education is first grade through third grade, you're supposed to learn how to read the basics. And then from fourth grade on, you read to learn. So we have only a third of our fourth graders able to read in basic minimal standards. This is going to destroy this country, as you just said. And I was a substitute teacher for a while. And if you look at these young people who are 7, 8, 9, 10 years old right now, in 20 years, those people will be filling the positions of CEOs, legislators, congressmen, and senators. Hopefully they won't stay there till they're 90 years old. But the fact of the matter is, if you look at where we're going, these young people today are not going to be qualified to lead this country. Now, I may not be around. I'm going on 73. I hope I will be. But the fact is, I can see the future, just as you mentioned. This is the most serious effort of undermining the United States, is the failure to address this. We lost 500,000 teachers in 2 years because of COVID, but because the teachers are not being paid adequately, because the schools are not being kept up. And special education, you have to have so many teachers per students, and it doesn't exist. The special education system is not functioning. The regular school system is not functioning, despite dedicated teachers. So you're absolutely right. And Even though Jill Biden has been a teacher for 30 years, I expected her to champion this cause, but neither party puts this as primary. The Republicans have their talking points: border crisis, crime. The Democrats have their talking prices: Ukraine, democracy. Nobody, nobody on either side of the aisle makes education the number one issue for the United States' future. And we are not going to have a future unless this is addressed today. Should have been done yesterday. You never heard it come up in any debate. So you and I don't know if we're in a minority or not, but we are in complete agreement that this is the most serious flaw in policymaking today. Much more than the budget, more than Ukraine, more than Russia, more than China. It's the failure to promote an educational policy. Because every child, every single child, no matter where they're born, what country, what continent, they're born with the potential of creativity, called sometimes the creative spark. This is superior to any adding machine, computer, AI. It is the ability to hypothesize, to discover new principles embedded in the universe. That's how civilization has progressed over the last several million years, is through the creative mind. And by not nurturing that creative mind, by not even teaching it to read, we are essentially destroying the minds of our children before they even have a chance to use them.
And a follow up, and then we'll position to Africa. And the reason I'm focused on this is because on the one hand, they want to talk about lawlessness and violence and the disrespect and the lack of compassion of the youth and the lack of respect for property and the lack of security of life of the youth. But they don't fund the proper guidance, not just any education, but the proper education, which would guide these people and civilize these people. And without funding for the proper guidance, and what I mean by that is, instead of having a teacher having to work 2 or 3 jobs, why is it that the basketball player gets $100 million or $200 million and the teacher has to work 3 jobs? These are the stewards of the lives of the future of a country, and to not take this seriously is like putting thermite to the base of the republic.
It's criminal. It's actually immoral, but it's also criminal. And people should be brought up for impeachment because of their criminality in not properly funding education. We should add that as an impeachable charge.
Now, over to the continent of Africa. I noticed a few weeks ago, all we heard was France and Niger and the French exploiting the resources of Niger. Why has that been pushed to the back burner? And also, when you answer that, why, if France has a minimum of 1,500 troops and a minimum staff in her embassy, why is it taking her, as said by Macron, to the end of the year to extricate those troops and those embassy staff away when it didn't take that long to deploy them there?
Well, don't forget, that's just 1,500 troops in Niger. They have troops in
Yep.
other countries. But the French and the U.S. A few years ago decided to make Niger the hub of their what they call counterterrorism policy. It's not really effective, but they decided to make that the hub. In addition to, I think, 2 drone bases the U.S. had, one
Yes.
very large one. I
Yes.
think there are several other military bases between the French and the U.S. forces. The French are about 1,500 troops, as you said. The U.S. is about 11 to 1,200. And the French don't want to leave. This has been one of their 14 countries that are considered francophone. That is, that they use the CFA currency, the CFA, which is controlled in Paris. And they have to give, I think, 50% of their reserves to the bank in Paris. They have to get permission from the Paris Central Bank for loans. It's a continuation of colonialism, even after these countries became liberated in the 60s and afterwards. And this is also what the IMF and World Bank does. These countries We had a wave of liberation begun by Kwame Nkrumah in 57 in Ghana, and then many, 30, 40 other countries in the 60s and 70s, and then throughout the other decades. But they were still liberated. The British and troops left, but they were still under the control of the same imperialist elite through the financial sector, through the fact that all prices are determined by the City of London, and you have loan agreements only with the IMF and the World Bank. Now, this is changing due to the BRICS and other measures, but this is the way it was. And the French basically were using uranium to provide electricity, nuclear energy, which is good for France, but only 3% of the Nigerian population had access to electricity. And if you look at all these countries in the Sahel and West Africa and Francophone, they all are poor. Nigeria may be the poorest, but none of them have, a majority of the people have access to electricity. Most of them have a large 40, 50, 60% of the population lives in extreme poverty. So these countries are rebelling against colonialism. Now, the U.S. has played a different kind of role. The United States has actually not been asked to leave, so they must have some arrangement. But on the other hand, they're supporting ECOWAS, the West African Organization of Africa, to bring back the previous president. They've even discussed a military invasion. My understanding is that the French ambassador has left, and they're starting to remove some of the troops. They really don't have a choice. But the overall conditions in the Sahel region, which is the countries along the thin strip of desert called the Sahel, which is below the Sahara, they're all in horrible economic shape, including Nigeria, including most of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa. So we have to have a revolution in policy and in economics to bring electricity to Africa, which it doesn't exist, to end poverty and to end hunger, all of which can be done. They're not subjective, they're subjective problems, not objective. And this is what I've been fighting for, that my friends in Africa and here in the US, is we need a complete reversal in US policy. Now, the fact that the United States is aligning itself with the French looks very, very bad. The French are hated, and they deserve to be hated. But the United States aligning itself with the French is a big, big mistake that Biden and Secretary of State Blinken are making, and it's going to come back at them if they don't break from the French right now.
Well, we know, but I have to ask this question. Why is it so hard for European countries, these same countries that are talking about the territorial integrity and the sovereignty and the independence of Ukraine, and are screaming to the top of their lungs at every moment and every opportunity? Why is it hard for them to recognize the independence, the territorial integrity, and the territorial integrity and the sovereignty of African nations? And why do they want to continue the occupation, be it political, militarily, or economically, of these African nations? And then when something goes wrong and the people flee their terrible conditions that are imposed upon them by the occupation, economically, politically, and militarily, by the European nations, they scream about an influx of migrants.
Well, it's obvious that you would not have these large numbers of migrants risking their lives. In some cases, brothers, knowing their other siblings have died, will still try to cross the Mediterranean. This would not be taking place without economic devastation in their country at home. Now, what the United States and Europe have done, and this is now way before China became more dominant, which begins, let's say, around 2000. Prior to that, all the countries in Africa looked to the United States first and the Europeans second. And we didn't do anything to help them. I've been working on for over 20 years a plan that I got from an Italian scientist called TransAqua, which would bring water from the Congo River basin, which is a very wet basin, through a navigable canal and dump the water in the Lake Chad Basin, which is drying up, has now been reduced by 90%. I was there back in 2014. I worked with the Lake Chad Basin Commission, one of the few Americans who even knows about this. And this was never supported by any country in the West except Italy, who did see it as a means of reducing migration. But we didn't do anything on this program. We haven't done anything to support this program. We haven't done anything to support a high speed rail network program, which is being advocated by the African Union and other individuals. We don't do anything to develop these nations. Why? Because we don't intend to. We don't desire to. We would rather have these nations mired in war and conflict and chaos, where they can easily be manipulated and controlled, than actually make them into independent sovereign nations. In fact, there aren't really, in my definition of economic and political sovereignty, there probably aren't any economic countries in Africa, especially sub-Saharan Africa, that could be technically called sovereign, because they actually don't get the opportunity to make their own decisions. Their decisions are made outside their country. We saw this in the recent war in northern Ethiopia, where we had the West, including the United States government, actively involved in trying to undermine the elected government of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. And now I've gotten numerous intelligence reports, so I don't have hard evidence yet, except in one case, that the queen of regime change, Victoria Nuland, who's never been involved in Africa, is actually deploying, some say being deployed, others say deploying Blinken to send her to run Africa policy. And she was the first American diplomat to go to Niger after the coup. So that speaks very poorly for what the direction the U.S. is doing. But the larger question is geopolitics. The zero-sum game thinking that the United States and the West have adopted is the world is fixed, the universe is fixed, human beings are fixed, which is not true, because the universe grows, America and human beings grow. But they say it's fixed, that therefore the only real question of political hegemony is who's on top and who's on the bottom. Who's a winner, who's a loser. And they get zero sum because it's fixed. So if you're on top, if you're a plus one, then it has to be a minus one somewhere to equal zero. This diseased thinking, which has dominated the United States and the West for decades, this is the problem we're having. Rather than seeing nations, sovereign nations, as developing and growing and becoming consumers and allies of the United States, we would rather keep them under control. And basically, we using Africa, and all the most intelligent, honest African experts will say this. But as you know from your own show, most people don't tell the truth. I can tell you this with certainty. The U.S. Africa policy doesn't exist except to stop China. There is no positive U.S. policy. It's all gobbledygook. We want democracy. We want good governance. If you, the West says to African nations, if you do what we tell you, then we may let you join as a servant to our rules-based international order, which is code word for our political financial oligarchy. And they don't want sovereignty. And China's not perfect, but China provides a different alternative, a different view, a different potential. And that potential now is growing with the expansion of the BRIC nations that we saw last month in August. But the fact of the matter is the West doesn't want these nations to develop. In fact, if you go to the most hardcore policy, it's Malthusianism. There's too many black and brown people in the world. We have to reduce that population. They say it every once in a while. And that's one of the tenets of the environmentalist movement. We have to reduce the population. We have to reduce the population. And since most of these colonialists are racist, and it comes out every once in a while, as we see in Europe, they blurt it out, they can't help themselves. This is the first population they want to reduce. So they're not interested in giving people electricity. which is the lifeblood of an economy. That's why we could take the 100 billion from Ukraine, or just take an equal amount, and we would extend the lives of people in Africa, because more people die from lack of electricity than anything. But we don't want to. We don't intend to. We'd rather have countries in chaos and poor so we can manipulate them. And as Malthus says, if we have too many people chasing after fixed resources, somebody's got to go. And that starts with the poor. And he designed a policy to eliminate poor, not to eliminate poverty, but to eliminate poor people by spreading disease and spreading horrible living conditions. That's Thomas Malthus. That's the hard core of it. Most people will never come say that. But this is what you see, and this is unfortunately dominates our policy. So unless we change this policy, we need leaders who say enough, this is over. We're going to develop these nations. And Kennedy was that. Roosevelt had a positive policy towards Africa, but Kennedy said when he came into office, we're going to reverse our policy under Eisenhower and Truman, and we're going to work with national leaders to develop their country. And he helped Kwame Nkrumah, the father of the liberation of Africa. He worked with Kwame Nkrumah to build the Volta Dam energy and industrial complex. And there's no other leader who's done that except Kennedy. And then, of course, since Kennedy, most of the leaders have no concern about the development of Africa. They'll say they're concerned, we really want democracy, human rights, these human rights violations. The most fundamental human right is the right to development. When a child is born, are you going to give that child a future, a job, or parents a job, housing, electricity? If you're not going to do that, then don't speak to me about nonsense human rights. You don't mean it. You're a fraud. Human rights require economic development, and if you don't want to discuss that, then you're not being honest. You're being a faker, and cut it out.
So, as you said, that these policies of those European or colonial nations are rooted in fascism and racism. If that is that the core of what you're saying?
Well, it's actually it's imperialism and racism more than fascism. They don't believe that black and brown people around the world are equal to the Caucasian race. Now they're losing the battle, because if you study population figures, the white population, Caucasian population, is not reproducing as fast. And for example, Nigeria has about 220 million people now. I know Nigeria well. The United States has about 325. In these projections of population growth, Nigeria will have over 400 million people in 2050, more than the United States. Nigeria will be the third most populated country, behind India number one and China number two. So the Caucasian colonial imperialist grouping are losing. They're losing the battle that they've dedicated themselves to. And it's a colonialist imperialist view that does not respect the creativity of human beings. Because to me, that's the universal quality. Color, diversity, ethnicity, that's fine. We should be diverse. But we're all the same when it comes to the potential of creativity of the mind. Every single human being has this potential. And therefore, there's the love of mankind is the love of this creative ability, of developing this creative ability in each child born no matter what country they come from. And the imperialist view is, we don't need any more people. We got too many people. We don't have enough resources. We got to get rid of some people. And of course, that's a lie, because resources themselves are created by scientific discovery. So it's all a big propaganda lie to keep a large section of the world underdeveloped.
I noticed when they call for population control, or they speak about Latin America and Africa and Asia, and at the same time, I remember seeing Charles before he ascended to the throne, and he was talking about population control, and in the same breath, he stated that Europeans need to reproduce more, and I was like, whoa, did anybody catch that?
Well,
Go ahead, go ahead.
Well, you got it right. Charles is a fanatic in terms of population reduction using the environmentalist argument, which is a phony argument of the so-called CO2. Charles is a fanatic. And if you go back to 1960, you had the World Wildlife Fund was created, and everybody was happy. It had a little panda bear, and everybody thought it was very cute. But the hard core of the World Wildlife Fund, like the Huxley crowd and others, was population reduction. I think, and Huxley was a president of the Eugenics Society for a while. So the basic, the most inner satanic qualities of the British oligarchy, which now Charles is the leader of, is population reduction of non-Caucasian people. And you saw it with Charles. You also had the foreign minister of the European Union, Burrell, a couple months ago, maybe 3 months ago, said, "Oh, we have to protect our garden of Europe from the jungle outside." See, they're so this is ingrained in them so much that they sometimes they can't prevent themselves from blurting it out, and then everybody's surprised. And of course, you and I are laughing because this is what they believe. It just comes out every once in a while.
Yeah, and it's amazing when he talks about protecting the garden from the jungle. The garden would not be able to exist in luxury without the resources from what it deems the jungle is, and it's crazy. And they compartmentalize these things, and I think in their mind to look down on somebody gives them the justification for implementing their racist imperialistic policies to the detriment of the entire world. You know, you have to be so selfish and so self-centered to want to control everybody's lives and to continue to suppress other people for fear that they may catch up to you or surpass you. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Well,
That's
that's
insanity.
right. That you put your finger. That's the deficiency of the oligarchical mindset. Because you see, it's not capitalism. If you look at the United States, we were built by an immigrant known as Alexander Hamilton. He designed the policies of his country against the agrarian slave owner crowd in the South. And if you look at Hamilton's policies, and you look at Lincoln's policies, and John Quincy Adams, and Franklin Roosevelt, and Kennedy, when you apply these policies of promoting industrial agricultural development, the economy grows. And if an economy grows, then it is beneficial not only to the economy that's engineering the growth, but it's beneficial to the rest of the world. The uh, Chinese ambassador recently gave a speech at the embassy I was at, and he made very clear. He said, when China is expanding its economy, it not only serves 1.4 billion Chinese, but it helps billions of others around the planet. And therefore, the idiots who root for a collapse of the Chinese economy are actually rooting for a collapse of the world economy, but they're so stupid, they're so blinded by their ideology, they can't think straight. But from a capitalist standpoint, let's call it an industrial capitalist standpoint rather than a finance capital. From an industrial capital standpoint, you want to promote growth. It's in your self-interest. It's in the self-interest of the United States to develop Africa. More consumers, more producers, a bigger market, more ideas, more creativity, since they're going to have the largest number of young people in the world as a continent. So if we were thinking in any kind of normal way, we would want to promote the development. But the oligarchical mindset is diseased. It can't think straight. It's perverted. And it does not see human beings and the world as a garden to be developed. And according to our friend in Europe, it's a jungle to be kept out of doors, like the Roman Empire wall. So the problem is the mind. This oligarchical view is a diseased mindset, and we're suffering from it. We here in the United States are suffering, and our friend and our allies and friends abroad. I mean, I live very, very modestly because I don't want to. I don't have the ability and don't have a desire to live a lifestyle that would corrupt my thinking. But the average American doesn't even have a choice because they are stuck in a rotten economic system. And as much as Biden and Democrats try to say how great it is, it's not great. And the average person will tell you it's not great. And that's why both the American population doesn't really support, according to the polls, doesn't support either of the leading candidates of the two parties. And yet, where is the leader going to come from that's going to change our policy?
Mm. And in the spirit of what you just said, I have a little clip. It's a short clip that'll make you smile because it's right on what you said. Here we go, right
Europe
here.
is a garden. We have built a garden. Everything works. It's the best combination of political freedom, economic prosperity, and social cohesion that the humankind has been able to build. There's three things together. And here Bruges is maybe the good representation of beautiful things, intellectual life, well-being. The rest of the world, and you know very well, Federica, is not exactly a garden. The rest of the world, most of the rest of the world is a jungle. And the jungle could invade the garden. And the gardeners should take care of it.
That's it. You got it.
Before we transition to the Ukraine event real quick, let me play something and I want you to address this right here. This is about 2 minutes. This is a 2-minute clip.
Okay. Sure.
And this is still in Africa. So here we are.
Here is your latest Africa news. The United Nations Security Council has unanimously voted to end its decade-long unsuccessful peacekeeping mission in Mali. The mission will have only 6 months to withdraw from the West African country. This month, Mali's Foreign Minister Abdoulaye Diop asked the force to leave without delay. Mali also kicked out French troops in 2022. Mali's foreign minister accused the UN mission of failing to respond to security challenges. The peacekeeping mission was established in 2013 to stabilize the country amid a rebel insurgency. He called on the United Nations Security Council to withdraw a peacekeeping mission operational in the country for a decade, citing its failure to respond to security challenges. MINUSMA head El Gassim Wayne reacted to Mali's decision, saying it was nearly impossible to maintain the mission without the host country's consent. There have been several protests in Mali and other parts of Africa, like the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Central Africa Republic, all calling on UN peacekeepers to leave due to failing to help. Currently, the United Nations has 4 peacekeeping missions in Africa: MINURSO in the Western Sahara, UNAMSIL in Sierra Leone, UNMI in Eritrea and Ethiopia, and MONUC in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. UN peacekeeping missions in Africa have faced numerous controversies, casting a shadow on their reputation. Instances of misconduct, abuse of power, and failure to protect civilians, theft of Naruto resources have emerged, causing significant concerns. These controversies have involved sexual exploitation and abuse, failure to protect civilians, corruption and financial mismanagement, use of excessive force, and inadequate capacity and training. But the most pressing concern from Mali is the UN's inability to effectively protect civilian populations during conflicts. The UN's response to the Rwandan genocide in 1994, where peacekeepers were unable to prevent the death of 1 million Rwandans and instead only save white diplomats, stands as a tragic example. Similar concerns have been raised in relation to the Darfur conflict in Sudan and the ongoing crisis in South Sudan. Let us know in the comments below if you found this video informative. Please show your support by liking and sharing.
With those events taking place, and let's not forget about the Malian government saying that France committed a genocide near the former French military base when they found a slew of slaughtered Malian bodies that were buried, just sand piled on them or whatever like that. And this sparked an outrage all across Mali. First, Mali became the first African nation to force out a UN peacekeeping mission. And why is it that UN, US, French, and Western so-called terror fighting teams or peacekeeping missions or whatever. They never do their job. America has been so-called fighting terror in Syria for a decade and hadn't done anything. America has been fighting terror in Iraq for 15, 16 years. And look at the situation in Colombia. America has been down there for decades saying that she was fighting drugs and the use and sale and the transportation of drugs have exploded under her watch. Why should these nations trust Western nations to do a job? Aren't they just getting fed up with them?
The example, it was interesting to me that the first example of the video you showed was Mali. Because I was in Mali for a week in 2013. The viewers may or may not remember, prior the overthrow of Mali occurred after Gaddafi was removed from power and assassinated. And what happened is, and I warned against this, and this was the Obama administration, liberal Democrat Obama, liberal Democrat Hillary Clinton, liberal Democrat Samantha Power, liberal Democrat Vice President Joe Biden, and Susan Rice. They engineered the destruction of the Sahel. So after Gaddafi was overthrown and then assassinated in October, here we are, 12 years later, October 2011, the Tuaregs and others moved into the Sahel big time. So the French came in and bombed some of them and pushed them back. But when I went to Mali in 2013, you could not go into the north. But the country was, the whole northern part of the country, which is 2/3 of the nation of Mali, is desert with 1 million people at that time. And this is where the extremists or terrorists, if you whatever name you want to call them, violent extremists, this is where they operate at, across the whole Sahel, because this area was no man's land. It was desolate. It was underdeveloped, even though the potential was there. There's an inland delta as opposed to a delta on the water. The Niger River makes a big turn in Mali, and there's a delta there before it heads south. This delta could have fed a large portion of the Sahel region. The French, when they were building their empire in the 30s, wanted to develop this delta to feed the French Empire. Never developed. Mali was put forward as the great democratic experiment. We helped form the country's leadership. We trained the military. And in 2012, it was the U.S. promoted it as the image of democracy. And then it collapsed. And it's still in a state of collapse right now. And this is the story. If you don't develop a nation, if you don't feed the people, if you don't help build the infrastructure, then people are desperate. And people who are desperate will do desperate things. And the counterterrorism effort, so-called, which was billions of dollars for the Sahel and the Sahara, has been a complete failure. And what's going on this year is that's a continuation of it. But it's not going to last much longer as the French are now being kicked out. And the same thing with Sudan. I worked with the head of UNIMED, Professor Gambari at the time, and he was trying to help develop the region, but there was no intent by the United States to develop the Sudan, even though it had the largest potential of agricultural land that was unused. Never desire to develop the agricultural potential of Sudan. So you see in all these cases, and Mali is an excellent case, really people shouldn't be surprised because you're seeing the consequence of the failure of the West to develop these nations. And the problem is, and this is, I get in discussions all the time in Washington on this, why people don't want me to present these ideas, is because this would mean we'd have to abandon our policy for the last 40, 50 years in Africa, which typifies our problems, the whole developing sector. But they don't want to make this change. They say, oh, no, we can't do it. But China's doing it. Mm-hmm. It's limited from my standpoint, but they're doing it. The United States has not built a road, has not built a railroad, doesn't build these things. They won't want to. And then they'll say to us, we don't have the money. But as we discussed at the top of your show, the money is always there if you want to, if you have the willpower. So we have a very perverted view of the rest of the world, and we should change it. And we're seeing change is coming anyway. The fact that the BRICS are now going to be 11 nations in January of 2024. They have their own development bank, which is going to expand. More and more trade is being conducted in regional currencies outside of the dollar. The group of 77 plus China met in Cuba a few weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
They're all saying the same thing. We are going to have an orientation towards development. The new paradigm has to be a paradigm of development. It cannot be the, quote, human rights, good governance policies of the so-called rules-based order. The shift is on. And as I wrote on my website, if people want to read my article, it's irreversible. Now the change has started. It's a potential and it can't be reversed. The question is how aggressively we realize the new potential for development.
And that's a good segue into the Ukrainian conflict. Do you believe that the Western leaders see this, know this, and it's starting to seep into their brains that we now are living in a change of rulership, a change of worlds, and that they will no longer be the dominant policymakers, the dominant financiers, and this has caused them to lash out to try to weaken Russia, weaken China, weaken Iran, and weaken all of those other players who may be late to the dance, but they're dancing nonetheless. Do you believe that these wars, the aggression against China, the potential aggression against Iran, and the Ukrainian conflict is a result of this situation?
I think it's a continuation of their perverted ideology. I mean, there's no question if you read the literature, and there's a lot that comes out of Washington from the government and from think tanks, they see China as their number one enemy. It doesn't matter what they say. This is what is in their minds. And sometimes they do say it. They see China as the number one enemy. And the Secretary of Defense, Austin, said it. He said that's why we need almost $1 trillion in our defense budget to defeat China. Russia is number two, but they can't carry out the same military attack on China right now. So they use the opportunity of Ukraine. And they see in that conflict that's going on tonight, this would be an opportunity to so weaken Russia that they would have no power. The idea of the rule-based order, the oligarchy, is you want to make sure your perceived, not your real, but your perceived ideological enemies are broken so they will submit to your dictates. And the Russians have seen NATO moving further east, further east, further east, and they say, well, we're not going to allow a militarized Ukraine on our border. And there's a faction, not everybody, but there's a faction that says, no, we're going to make the Russians submit. They're going to get on their knees. Now, the problem with this is that this brings with it a danger of nuclear war, which you only have with China and Russia, really. And this is a real danger because the more advanced equipment the United States sends in, and now the British have admitted that they're sending British soldiers to train Ukrainians. So now you're going to have British soldiers that are going to be killed in this war. So you're bringing the war very, very close to a NATO versus Russia military conflict. Even though everybody says we don't want to fight Russia, we don't want to fight, they bring it right to the edge, and the British are involved in leading this. So when you get right to the edge, even your intentions, if they're even true, are not going to be dominant because all you need is a mistake. All you need is someone to say, fire one, and it goes. And this is the problem. So yes, they want to destroy, weaken Russia. They see this as an opportunity. Russia, they don't understand, will never submit. We saw that in Stalingrad in World War II. They will not submit. They will even allow more of their country to be destroyed if they have to defend themselves. So the Ukrainians can't win because the Russians can't lose.
Mhm.
And last year, 1 year after the war, there were many efforts and proposals for peace, and the U.S. ruled them out. I don't know who is running the current government of Ukraine, but they're not doing it in the interest of Ukrainians. There has to be a security settlement that satisfies the needs of Ukraine and satisfies the needs of Russia. And to continually dismiss Russia's needs is a form of insanity that could get us into nuclear war. That's the biggest concern, outside of just the number of people, Russians and Ukrainians who die. My family history on my mother's side comes from Ukraine, so it's very sad what's going on there, and it didn't have to happen. It could have been avoided, and that's why I'm so angry at the U.S. government. We didn't have to do this.
Well, when we look at that, we can also compare it to something you and I talked about earlier. Mr. Lindsey Graham himself, he never met a war that he didn't like, unless he had to fight in it. But he, in his same token, as he talked about supplying $60+ billion to the Ukraine war, he talked about America has not lost one soldier. America, this war benefits America and the rest of the world. If we lose, and he said we, as if that he's openly stating that America's part is a party to the war. He said, if we lose in Ukraine, then there goes Taiwan. You see how they connect this, and they're
Yeah,
trying to justify confrontation with China. Now, logically, let's look at this for a second because I know the time is limited, but I just want to look at this just a little logically. Okay, the United States policy and 99% of the world's policy is that Taiwan is an inseparable part of China. That means that China has sovereignty over Taiwan. Now, China is America's largest financer, largest infrastructure builder, largest banker, largest trade partner, largest manufacturer, largest exporter, and receives the largest amount of U.S. goods. Okay, if your economy is collapsing and you continue to deficit spend, isn't it suicidal to try to wage a war with a nation that produces most goods on your shelves? And this means that if you wage war with them, you'll create massive unemployment. Bankruptcies will spiral out of control, and the U.S. economy will not just tank, but it will go into such a tailspin that it would be you couldn't recover from that. So why aren't these so-called deep thinker politicians analyzing it from that angle?
well, your first words out of your mouth were, let's look at this logically. The problem is there is no logic involved. There is a mindset. There's a mindset that certain elements of the oligarchical faction believe that they are destined to run the world and direct policy. So logic doesn't enter into it. Industrial capitalism doesn't enter into it. Making money is not the issue because we're losing money, as you pointed out. So none of these issues are relevant. The relevant part is this oligarchical mindset of destined to be the rulers. The people in Washington who discuss de-risking or separating the U.S. from the Chinese economy, these people are certifiably insane. Even this will destroy, as you pointed out, this will destroy even the weak U.S. economy we have. And I've heard people in Washington boast, oh no, yeah, the U.S. economy, we may suffer a little bit, but the Chinese economy, they're in really bad shape. Meanwhile, their growth rates have been tended to be between 6 and 10%, even on the bad times. Now this year is a little bit low. The U.S. leadership suffers from clinical insanity. And you know the famous expression, they allege it came from Einstein, that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and getting the same result and not changing it. Right now, we will destroy the US economy more than we have. And we may bring us to the edge of nuclear war because we have a faction of the leadership that is not based in reality. And the problem is that we don't have another leadership that is fighting to oppose that. And that was, look, Kennedy was, I mean, he was a really interesting individual because he had to fight the encirclement of people who opposed him were around his administration. He had some hardcore people who were with him. But he was fighting against this establishment the whole time. So was Roosevelt. And the problem is, where is the leadership going to be that stands up for America and America's true interest? It's in my interest as an American to develop the rest of the world. I benefit from that. I benefit from a stable Ethiopia, from a stable West Africa, from a prosperous Nigeria. It benefits me personally, and it benefits my country. And it benefits me and my country to work with China, not to threaten China, not to threaten Taiwan, as you pointed out. The Chinese will never give up Taiwan. And it's been agreed to by every politician in the last 50, 60 years. So why do people discuss it? Because they think they can push China to the edge. Now, if you read the writings of the Chinese, and they've just come out with a new white paper on development, they want to develop. They want to see the world grow. And in Africa, they are not exporting the Chinese model. They're very clear in that. But they're giving people the opportunity through long-term loans to build railroads, to build ports, to build airports, to build dams. These are the things the African continent needs. And Ethiopia now has set a new standard, really, because they now are almost complete the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam at their own money. They didn't take money from anybody. And it should be completed in about 2 years. They finished the final filling. There's no confrontation, or shouldn't be any more, with Egypt or Sudan. And this is an example of a developing country, not an affluent country, putting forward policy for the benefit of the future of the nation. And this is what we need. So we don't want to run the policy. We say to African countries, what do you need? You run the policy. How can we help you? Like, for example, let's take the French in Niger. Because the French has exploited Niger. 3% of the population has access to electricity. 10 out of 25 million people live in abject poverty. So if we had a development-minded Macron, we would say, okay, what do you need? We will help you build it. We will help you finance it. We will help you build it. You will direct it. You will run it. You tell us what it is. Now, that's the same policy, rather than just funding so-called counterterrorism. So the French have taken a big, big hit. And it's not that I think that these military crowd that's taken over 6 countries now in the Western Africa, Sahel region, I don't necessarily believe that they know the expertise of how to develop the nation, but they've reached a point where they can't stand the exploitation anymore of foreign interests. Now, just because they overthrew these governments doesn't mean they know what to do. But the fact that they overthrew them should tell us what we have been doing is wrong. So unless the U.S. political leadership is brain dead, the Niger and other examples should demonstrate to us we have to change our policy. Whether we will, I don't know. But that's what I fight for every day.
In closing, and for those of you who are listening, we're going to continue to show. We've had him on for a long time, and we're going to let him handle his business outside of the show. But I want to say this in closing with you, going back to some of them may not know how to run the countries. There's an old saying: "The journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step." And so we look at it like this: when the settlers, the colonizers made it to the shores of America, they didn't really know how to organize and run a country. They did it by trial and error, but they had the freedom to do so. And anytime somebody interdicted, they went to war. I think that is the God-given right of those other nations too. And I feel what you're saying. And I want to say to you, thank you for joining us. We want to have you back on this program. Man, it's been such a blessing.
Well, I encourage people to learn about this kind of policy, geopolitics we've been discussing in Africa. And I would encourage people to go and subscribe to my website, LawrenceFreemanAfricaInTheWorld.com. There's new material put up every week, and I think you will enjoy it.
Thank you so much, Mr.
And
Freeman.
thank you for having me.
I be blessed. Everybody, we still got a show to get, so don't click off or anything like that. I just want you all. I want to address a few things from earlier this morning. We were check this out. There were so many things going on prior to the show, and I want to fill you in on it. We are supposed to have another intel drop with Larry Johnson. Larry had a few minutes this morning, but the schedules, because we had Mr. Freeman, we could not bring him on at this moment. He's checking his schedule, and he'll get back with us sometime this week or maybe next week, and we'll have an intel drop with Larry Johnson, former CIA analyst, and international personality. We will have him here. I just heard, matter of fact, I'm looking down as I was talking to Mr. Freeman. I was looking down, and Martin Saif hit me up, and so Martin hit. It went back to the screen. Hold on one second. Martin hit me up. So, and he was telling me something. So we'll have him back on the program. Also, I don't know how this is working. So listen, even after this show is over with, we're supposed to have around 3:30. I don't know if it's going to come through because of the connection problems and the time difference, but set it to your watch. We're supposed to have radio host personality that's in Russia. Tim Kirby. Yeah, I told you we had a lot of stuff coming for you guys. We're supposed to have him on 3:30 today, and I think it's 11:30. I think it's 11:30 Moscow time. But here's the kicker: he'll be at a football game. So if the football game is not over, the show doesn't air. You understand? It's going to be live, if you understand what I'm saying. So we're trying to bring you a whole bunch of things. This was the last minute thing. He hit me up. Let's see, about what time was that? Kurt, he hit me up about 6 a.m. this morning, but it was like 2 o'clock their time. So I didn't get the message till I went and checked my emails around 10 a.m. or something like that. And so we're trying to make it where if he has the free time and the football game is over, it'll be 3:30. Okay. It'll be 3:30 today, Central Time. Okay. So I just want to let you all know this. I told you guys I'm working hard behind the scene, and I want to go back and say something. I want to give a shout out to my guy, Matthew Eric, who made some of this possible behind the scene. Matthew, thank you a million, man. May God bless you and your wife, man. I really, really, really appreciate this. Medi, if it's no, I don't think it's 2:30 Eastern time. I think it's if it's 3:30 Central time, it'll be 4:30 Eastern time, because Eastern is an hour ahead of Central. Okay. Now we have that situated, and I hope you understood what I was saying and I was trying to get out. And we also have, hold on one second. We're trying to also, give me a second. Where is it? Let me, where is it? We're bringing another person on. We got about 3 or 4 more other people that we're bringing on. We're trying to work out scheduling. Okay. I'm working hard behind the scene, guys. I am. And we're going to have some powerful Patreon and channel member videos and interviews that'll be coming up in the next few weeks to months. So subscribe to my Patreon. Also subscribe and become a channel member. Also, Minnie says, yes, 4:30. I should know this. I live in Maine. So we're going to have a lot of that. And also go over to the Locals channel. And we're going to get into the news in just a second, but I got to put these public announcements out. Go over to our Locals. Sign up for the Locals. It's free. We're going to start trying. My son we tried 2 times in a row, and and only part of the video showed up. But we're gonna start trying to stream to locals once a week, and we'll be doing a Patreon for you guys who want to do Patreon. We're going to be streaming there once a week too. We're getting everything put together. We have a lot of guests in the coming down the runway. Okay, but I want to take the time out also to thank each and every one of you who support, whether you're a channel member, a viewer, a lover, or a hater of the channel. Thank you for giving us your time. You make this stuff work. Now let's go into it. Okay, let's check some news out while we have a little time. And remember, I can stay on a little bit, but then I got to try to set up the show for Kirby, and hopefully he'll be in the booth at that time. Okay, so if he's not in, don't be mad at me, because guess what is it? I think if it's 3:30 my time, 2:30. I think it's 1:30 your time, Pacific. Okay. Medi says he likes being on locals better than Patreon. It's cool, whichever one that floats your boat. I'm trying I'm working out these new things on. I'm not a tech guy, okay? I'm trying, so don't laugh at me. I'm trying these things to bring more content to you guys, and also to interact with you guys more. All right, so we can get a feeling of who each one of us is, and that we can take each other's conversation and thoughts and perspective into consideration when we're doing shows, because that's what makes it work. Okay. Omeda says he likes locals better because it has more options for subs. Oh, okay, that's three. Okay, but locals also have I will help me. Okay, Medi, that's cool. That's cool. I'll take you up on that shortly. So let's get into the news. What's on the like they say, what's on the log for the lizard? Let's get into it. So as Mr. Freeman and I were talking at the beginning of the show, Lindsey Graham comes out and he talks about that the United States will provide $60 billion and more money for the Ukrainian war. And he justifies that, saying that Ukraine would have been in Crimea by now if the administration would have provided him with more weapons more timely, even though Russia is destroying all of the weaponry that not just the United States, but all of NATO has provided. I want you to see how detached from reality these people are, and how much of a warmonger they are. They're war whores. They're war prostitutes. And they work for the big corporations. And I want you to think about this while we're addressing this. How much contempt that they have to have for the lives of those people who are lost on the battlefield. To look at you and to look at those people as expendable pieces on a chessboard. Listen, you can always print money. You can always get money. If you lose money, if you spend money, you can always get that. But once life is taken, that life can never be reproduced. So when we talk about the disrespect and the disregard for livelihood in the projects and in the urban areas, look at the example. These people don't respect anybody. To be willing to sacrifice an entire nation, Ukraine, okay, so that the United States can wound Russia, can justify more military spending, and then provoke China is insanity. That's absolutely insane. Forget about the cost in the monetary sense. Think about the cost in man and woman power. The money can be recouped, but not by America, but it can be recouped. But can the lives lost be recouped? Can the lives that have been damaged and have been permanently stained by what they saw and heard and felt and experienced in war, can those lives be recouped the way they were prior to? How can you have such a disregard for life and the sanctity of life, and at the same time talk about you a Christian, or talk about you a Muslim, or talk about you follow Muhammad, or talk about you follow Jesus, and yet you are disregarding the livelihood of people. You're willing to throw away millions of lives so that Lockheed Martin can get a contract, so that Boeing can expand, so that the Israeli war companies can expand, so that the French war companies can expand, the German war companies can expand. Because let us not forget, BMW was founded by the Nazis. Let's not pretend that didn't happen. Let's not pretend that these major companies that are called luxury car companies and what else? What is the major company here? I know it because I work Westinghouse, and stuff. These companies are war profiteers. Think about, I don't think you guys understand, even the paint companies are war profiteers. Do you know that? The DuPonts, they're war profiteers. How the heck do you think that they've gotten their money? War for profit, nothing but a massive money laundering scheme. That's right, Joel. Let me put this up here real quick. So you got the DuPonts, the Rockefellers, and all of these people who are willing to sacrifice your children's lives and your lives so that they can maintain a monopoly on power, a monopoly on wealth, so that they can try to control the lives of not just their constituents and their fellow so-called citizenry. They want to control the politics of the globe, and they will push the world towards thermonuclear war to do it. If you believe that I'm lying, look at what is going on in Ukraine. Look at what the British are saying. Well, we may train Ukrainian troops in Ukraine now. And you heard what Dmitry Medvedev said. He said, and you do that, then know that your troops will be destroyed because they become legitimate targets for the Russian armed forces. So you have a small nation, Britain. It has a couple of nuclear weapons that are attached to missiles that the United States gave them. And they are braggadocious, antagonistic, and arrogant even. Why? Why? Because a lot of people think that America calls all the shots. Why? It is because Britain and America are one and the same. These two, if one dies, the other dies. If one collapses, the other collapses. So they have to be like this. Don't think that all of the orders are being given by the United States. That's not how things work. Some of these orders are coming from London. Who gave birth to who? Did the United States give birth to England? Or did England give birth to the United States? Huh? So with these antagonistic policies, thousands of miles away, Germany coming out saying that our missiles now can be used to not just target Russian troops in Ukraine, but we give the Ukrainians permission to target Russian territory. And then at the same time, look at the hypocrisy. At the same time, if a Russian drone veers out of Ukraine into a NATO nation, we may have to use Article 5. So hold on, let me get this straight. You can supply all the weapons to keep the war going. Weapons that are targeting my troops in Ukraine, weapons that are targeting my warships in Crimea, weapons that are targeting my warships in the Black Sea, and weapons that are targeting Belgorod and the surrounding Russian regions. But a drone that is attacking people that you've supplied arms to may stray into NATO territory, which is former Soviet territory, will then force NATO to now institute Article 5. Man, if you don't get out of here with this foolishness, Russia, listen to me, I did a clip here. Yeah, let me put this up here real quick. I'm gonna put Hannah up here in a second, but let me put this up here. That's one of the companies I was talking about too, Volkswagen. But it slipped my mind. That's what I was trying to think of at the time. Thank you, No Way Out. But now let me put Hannah up here real quick. The Western countries are ruled by psychopaths. Psychopaths. Okay, now listen. I put a video up that Russia. It's called War Talk. It's a short clip, about 6 minutes, and it's an excerpt from a show I did. I don't think it was yesterday. I think it was the one I did prior to yesterday, and it's about a 5 or 6 minute clip, and it's called War Talk. And I'm paraphrasing. Russia must speak the language of empire. And what I'm saying to you all, for those of you who may not have seen it, if I speak English and you only speak German, right? Either you must learn English or I must learn German for us to properly communicate. Is that not right? If you speak Chinese and I speak Swahili, either you must learn Swahili or I must learn Chinese or Mandarin for us to properly communicate, right? Well, Russia right now is speaking the language of international law and the proper organs like the UN and all of this stuff like this. But America continues to speak the language of war, provocations, right? Now, we see that America has not understood Russia's message, but Russia is getting a taste of America's message, right? So Russia is picking up on what America is dealing. So now for Russia to convey herself properly to the empire, Russia has to learn the language of the empire, the only language that the empire speaks. This is common sense. Because how can you expect a person to properly understand you if you can't if you don't understand the language, or that person doesn't understand the language that you speak? If they refuse to learn your language and you're picking up on bits and pieces of their language, and it is vitally important for you to convey a message to that person, common sense tells us that we must do something to try to learn some of that language so that we can convey our message to them with the utmost sincerity and importance. Is that not right? So while Russia is talking international law, the United States ignores it. While Russia is talking about the international order, the United States talks about the international rules-based order. While Russia talks about, listen, let's do something fair and just, America's talking about a U.S. Western-centered world. While Russia is talking about negotiations and peace and the respect of national sovereignty and territorial integrity, the United States is saying you are not allowed to have spheres of influence, but we are. So now, at every turn that you speak to the empire in the West, they do this. How can you expect them to understand you when they refuse to speak your language? And you know that what you have to say is of the utmost importance and is vital for your security and the security of those who are ignoring you in your language. To get the message across, what do you have to do? You have to speak to them in some type of way that will get their attention, their respect, and force them to want to learn what you were talking before. Okay? I'm not advocating war. I'm saying that Russia needs to speak the war language that America speaks. That is the only way that you are going to get the utmost attention of the empire. That's the only way. When Iran tried to talk sensible and civilized to the empire, what happened? America surrounded them with bases. America threatened Iran. America sanctioned Iran. And then America invited the Iranian general, the number 2 person in the country, who was tapped to succeed the current Ayatollah. The United States said that they needed to talk to him so that he can once again help them fight against terrorism. Immediately on departing from Iran into Iraq and exiting the plane and getting into the delegation cars the convoy, the United States took the opportunity to not only kill him, but kill 2 Iraqi generals and a colonel. So they were ignoring the language that Iran was speaking, the language of cooperation and diplomacy and win-win situations. Look at what they're doing to China, the largest investor, largest trade partner. China, which has a manufacturing capacity that the world has never seen before. They are stoking tensions with China, ignoring their own national interests because they see China as a threat. China continues to say, let's do business. America says, okay, let's do business. And at the same time, what did she do yesterday? Sail warships through the Taiwan Strait while talking about the need for cooperation. So while America is talking about let's bring the war to the end, what it said, but the war must end on our terms. How can losers dictate war terms? Did Germany get to dictate its terms after it lost World War II? Huh? Did America get to dictate terms to Vietnam when it lost the Vietnam War? Did Saddam Hussein get to dictate the terms of war when he lost to the U.S. coalition? So if we see examples, then how in the hell can America expect Russia to bow to the terms of the losers? See, Russia is speaking and the West is speaking. But in between, there's a block here because Russia understands what the U.S. and the West is saying, but the U.S. and the West are willfully ignoring or misinterpreting or misunderstanding what Russia is saying. So to get Russia's point across, guess what Russia has to do? Russia must speak the language of the empire. Is that not right? Now, we're all adults in here, most of us, right? Common sense would dictate this. Is that not right? Now, if they refuse to do this, it shows a lack of common sense in some leadership. Because common sense dictates this. Not advocating for war, not the advocation of confrontation, but common sense. The advocacy for common sense dictates that. Are we not right? Huh? Let's see. Let's see right here. I know I'm going to butcher your name again, my brother, Ken Chow. Thank you for showing up. Joel Bradford, facts. Randoms, I always butcher your name. And so, as I say, charge it to my head, not to my heart. Randomy Zerg is in the chat. He says, I'm late. Got to watch from the start. Respect, Rashid. Respect back to you. No Way Out says, at Rashid, by the way, the British journal, The Sun, published a video of a rescue from a Ukrainian soldier near Bakhmut who wear the badges of the IS and speaks Arabian. All right. All right. Now, here's another one. No Way Out says Russia has no choice. That's what I'm saying. All of the viable choices to communicate with the West have been either closed off or destroyed. Russia has no choice. Their hands have been forced to do this. Again, common sense dictates that. Right? Common sense. Now, let us look at it in a shorter term. Let us give an example. You know I'm the king of analogies. So let's look at it. If you have an assailant or a suspect in your sight, and you're communicating to the suspect, we don't want to hurt you. Stop. Put your weapon down. Put your hands up and get down on the ground. If that suspect fails to adhere to all of the protocols that are acceptable, and if that suspect starts jumping fences, kicking down people's doors, running through their houses, and while he's doing that, not putting the gun down, firing at random to try to cause a melees and a mess for his escape, then the law enforcement officers would be in their rights to what? To do what? To use the language that the suspect has shown that that's the only thing that he has respect for. Right? Am I not right? So if we can see that on a macro term, or micro term, excuse me, we should be able to see that in everyday life. Shouldn't we? So if Russia, hey, listen what he says. Ken Chow says, let them have it, Rashi. That's what I'm saying. You got to let them have it. If they're firing randomly, ignoring your commands, showing contempt for your commands and contempt for the lives of people around, then you have to do what's best for the people around and for your safety. But Russia continues to ignore this, and guess what happens? America and the West continues to escalate. Now, if Russia, we have Dmitry Medvedev, the former president, the longest serving former prime minister of the Russian Federation, and now the co-chair or the assistant chair of the Russian Federation's National Security Council. It should be said through him, we don't want confrontation with the West, but it seems that all options have been exhausted, and the West wants confrontation with us. And then he should let this slip out. So now when we target terrorists on the border, when we target Ukrainian forces on the border with NATO nations, we will no longer be concerned about whether or not our weapons, our missiles, our bombs, our artillery stays within the confines of Ukraine. From this point on, since you continue to put tinder on the fire, if the fire goes outside the rocks and burns you sitting on the outside, then that's what happens to you. And if you escalate from that point, we too will escalate in kind. For one escalation, it will be met with two escalations, right? So that makes three escalations. One from you, two from us. We have already seen that the Western arms depots are their cupboards are nearly empty. They cannot outproduce Russia. So we see, listen, what America is doing right now is bluffing before the world. That's what they're doing. Let's go to a boxing match. If you watch a boxing match, or I think an MMA match, and a person has been hit with a good shot and they've been rocked, right? What they do to buy for time, they'll act as if they're not hurt. They'll shrug it off and be like, come on. And in reality, they know that punch got their attention. But what they're trying to do is make you back up just enough, give them just enough time for a little breathing room so that they can regroup and reconstitute their thoughts and then reformulate a plan to try to come back and get back. That's what the West is doing. Russia should call their bluff. Okay. You openly say that you're arming them. You openly say that you're training them. You openly say that you're giving them assistance, and every time a bombing takes place on Russian territory, there's a Western spy plane, a Western drone, or a weapon warplane that is there or has visited that exact area. Okay, from now on, because we're going to treat this like war. We're going to treat this like law also. If there's a bombing near or after you have a drone or a warplane or a spy plane near the vicinity that the bombing takes place, we're shooting them down from this point on. Every time one comes up, we're going to extend the range from 12 miles. You can't come 36 miles. This is a war zone. You cannot bring your planes within 36 miles. Even if you're flying them on NATO territory, we're going to send up warplanes over the area, because national security should be paramount to Russia, and it should be paramount to NATO. Well, you're doing everything that is not in the interest of your national security. Am I not right? Now, No Way Out says, I wonder if the U.S. will bomb Kyiv now. It have been confirmed that the Ukrainian used chemical weapons, but I guess it will land under the table. Ukraine is not Syria. Well, I did an interview with Scott Ritter, I think about a week ago, and I asked him why Russia has not responded in kind. And he gave an excellent answer, one that even had, I had it in the back of my mind, but really didn't pay attention to until he brought it out and he said it, and I could understand that. I advise all of you to go, even if you've seen the video, go back and listen to parts of it until it gets to that part. And his reasoning is top notch on that. I got to give it to him. On that is top notch. So it's the video, that the most recent interview that I've done with Scott Ritter. I believe it was last week, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, go check that out. Let's look at something. Let's see. Let me go to the chat real quick. What time? Oh, it's once. Hey guys, listen. Let me try to what is this thing doing? Here we go with this foolishness. Let me try to get off and try to schedule this show with Kirby. Okay. You guys Google who he is. Okay. Google who he is, and we're gonna have who else? We might have Alex Craner on the show. Google him, Alex Craner, Kraine. Krainer. Excuse me. We might have him on the show. We're trying to work out a time in a day, okay? And let's see. I'm trying to see something. Okay. I can't wait to do this intel drop with Larry Johnson again. I have to pick his mind. Tim Kirby, Russian radio. He's a radio host in Russia. He'll be. We're going to try to have him on the platform. I got to schedule the show, and I got to try to send him the link. And if he's back from his football game, we'll do the show tonight. Today. And as a matter of fact, in less than 2 hours, 2 hours to be exact, 2 hours and 7 minutes. If not, then we're going to reschedule that, refandangle that to him, because his time is 8 hours or 9 hours ahead. And then he has his own radio show, and we'll try to schedule it sometime around his free time. So we have to do that, okay? I'm trying to bring you guys something, and I really want him on because he is in Russia, so he can give us a view from Russia itself, and he can give us a dip into the thinking of ordinary Russians and Slavs in the region. Okay, so I really hope that he's back from that football game. He's trying to do the show, but he had prior engagements already confirmed. So we're going to try to get him on for you all. Please try to join us back. Even if he's not on, join so that I can let you know he's not on, and then we can reschedule the show, okay? I really would appreciate that. Now, on that note, I'm about to do this now. On that note, know that I love you, but know that my love pales in comparison to the love that the almighty, true, and living God has for you. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true, but above all things, stay righteous. Hey, mama, your baby boy loves you more than life. Deuces, everybody, and remember, be back here in 2 hours. I love y'all. We're out of here.